Hi, glad to see you on my channel. Let's talk about cults. But before we begin, I'd like to ask you to support my channel, subscribe, and give this video a like if you enjoy it. This will help promote my channel. Thanks for your attention. Let's begin. NXIVM. In the late 1990s, a mysterious organization called NXIVM emerged in the U.S. Its founder, Keith Raniere, presented himself as a brilliant thinker and his company as a personal development school. The seminars promised participants confidence and success. But behind the facade of motivational training lay a dark truth. NXIVM turned out to be a meticulously crafted cult. Members were manipulated, financially drained, and forced to share compromising information later used for blackmail. Women were drawn into a secret society called DOS, where they were branded with Raniere's initials, subjected to humiliation and abuse, all under the guise of self-improvement. The cult operated for nearly 2 decades until a 2017 New York Times investigation exposed its true nature. Arrests, trials, and scandals followed. In 2020, Keith Raniere was sentenced to 120 years in prison for blackmail and sexual exploitation. Thus, for almost 20 years, a genuine system of control and violence lurked beneath a mask of good intentions. Aum Shinrikyo. Aum Shinrikyo, a cult that became synonymous with terror. In 1995, its members carried out an attack in the Tokyo subway, releasing deadly sarin gas. 13 people died. Hundreds were injured. It all began in 1984 when Shoko Asahara declared himself a prophet. His teachings mixed Buddhism, Christianity, and apocalyptic prophecies. Asahara promised his followers salvation from the impending end of the world. Shoko proved quite effective, and by the late 1980s, the cult had expanded, opening branches in the US, Russia, Germany, and Australia. Asahara increasingly spoke of war and prepared his people for battle. By the 1990s, Aum Shinrikyo had transformed into an armed organization studying chemical and biological weapons. The subway attack became the culmination of their fanaticism. Arrests followed the attack. Asahara was executed in 2018, but his ideas, unfortunately, still find followers, though not as many as before. Heaven's Gate. In spring 1997, police discovered 39 bodies in a rented mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California. All wore identical uniforms, black shirts, sweatpants, and iconic Nike sneakers. Nearby lay plastic bags and bowls containing remnants of poisoned pudding. These were members of the Heaven's Gate cult who had committed mass suicide. The cult emerged in the 1970s, when its founders, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, declared themselves chosen ones, sent to prepare people for transition to a higher level of existence. They believed followers' souls would ascend to aliens, waiting in a spacecraft behind the Hale-Bopp comet. Nettles died in 1985, which only strengthened Applewhite's beliefs. He urged cult members to completely isolate themselves, cutting ties with their families. It all culminated in March 1997, when all cult followers recorded video messages smilingly speaking of their transition and took poison. Manson Family. In the summer of 1969, Hollywood was shaken by a horrific tragedy. At director Roman Polanski's house, his pregnant wife, actress Sharon Tate, and her friends were brutally murdered. Behind this atrocity was the family cult, led by fanatic Charles Manson. Charles Manson, a figure shrouded in mystery and scandal. Born in 1934, he spent most of his youth in prisons. Released in 1967, he found himself at the epicenter of California's counterculture movement, where he gathered a group of young people, mostly women, who called him their messiah. The cult's philosophy mixed biblical imagery, occultism, and Beatles songs, which Manson interpreted as prophecies. He preached about an imminent race war, helter-skelter, and saw himself as chosen to initiate this war and chaos. To this end, in 1969, Manson ordered his followers to commit a series of murders to provoke the apocalypse. The victims were Sharon Tate and her friends, and the following day, the LaBianca couple. Manson and other family members were subsequently arrested. The trial became one of the most notorious in U.S. history. Charles Manson was sentenced to life imprisonment, where he remained until his death in 2017. People's Temple. On November 18, 1978, the world learned of an unprecedented tragedy. Over 900 people, including 200 children, died in the remote settlement of Jonestown, Guyana, drinking poison on their leader Jim Jones's orders. It all began in the 1950s, when Jones, starting as a preacher, created the People's Temple, a movement promising equality and justice. But behind the virtuous facade lay a brutal cult. Jones manipulated his followers, intimidated them, and proclaimed himself their savior from an impending apocalypse. He convinced them the world was spiraling into chaos, and only the People's Temple could save them from nuclear war and global destruction. The preacher declared himself their savior and demanded absolute loyalty. In 1974, feeling mounting pressure from critics and authorities, Jones relocated his community to the Guyanese jungle, establishing the settlement of Jonestown. He called it a utopia, but in reality, it was a labor camp where people lived in isolation under constant surveillance. Cult members were forced to work to exhaustion. Dissent was suppressed, and escape attempts were severely punished. Disaster struck when Congressman Leo Ryan arrived to investigate the settlement. During his visit, several community members attempted to flee with Congressman Ryan. Jones ordered Ryan and his companions killed, then gathered all his followers in the central pavilion. There, he convinced them that the end was inevitable, and the only way out was revolutionary suicide. Adults and children drank a beverage laced with cyanide. Those who resisted were killed. In total, 918 people died, including Jim Jones himself. And Jonestown remains to this day a symbol of human tragedy born from unlimited trust and fanatical devotion. The Unification Church. In 1954, in South Korea, Sun Myung Moon established the Unification Church, declaring himself a Messiah personally commissioned by Jesus Christ to complete his mission. Moon's teaching was built on the concept of the true family. He and his wife called themselves the true parents, destined to unite humanity. Belief in their divine purpose became the foundation of the movement, and salvation was considered possible only through Moon's intervention. The church became famous for its mass weddings, where couples, often strangers to each other, were married according to Moon's selection. The largest ceremony took place in 1982, when thousands of couples were married simultaneously in South Korea. Despite accusations of brainwashing and being labeled a cult, the organization grew into an international empire with branches in dozens of countries. Enormous donations from followers helped Moon build media and business assets, strengthening his influence. After Moon's death in 2012, his children continued to lead the organization. Although the Unification Church is viewed as a cult in many countries, it still exists and counts tens of thousands of followers. Cult of Grigory Grabovoy. In the late 1990s, a man appeared in Russia claiming he could achieve the impossible. Grigory, who proclaimed himself a messiah, asserted he could resurrect the dead, cure incurable diseases, and prevent disasters. His promises quickly drew attention, and his followers came to regard him as their savior. Grabovoy built his cult on ideas that humans possess supernatural abilities and can become godlike by following his teachings. Adherents paid enormous sums of money to participate in his seminars and sessions, where he taught them how to control reality, heal themselves and their loved ones, and most importantly, bring the deceased back to life. The courses cost huge amounts, and the promises grew increasingly fantastical. In 2006, Grabovoy was arrested and sentenced to prison for large-scale fraud. However, even from prison, he continued to influence his followers, and his cult still exists today. His ideas found resonance not only in former USSR countries, but also abroad. The Anastasians? In 1995, a new spiritual leader emerged in Russia, Vladimir Megre, a former businessman who claimed to have met a mysterious woman named Anastasia in the remote taiga. She allegedly possessed supernatural abilities and lived in harmony with nature, far from civilization. Megre shared the knowledge he received from her in a book series called The Ringing Cedars of Russia. The books became a genuine phenomenon, spawning a movement known as the Anastasians. The central idea of the movement was returning to nature, creating family homesteads where families could live in unity with the land, eat exclusively organic food, and reject the comforts of modern civilization. Followers built communities, planted cedar groves, and believed in spiritual fusion with nature, even to the extent of making love in garden beds. Many sold their city apartments and started life from scratch, as joining the movement required contributions and adherence to strict rules. Despite criticism and ridicule, the Anastasians remain active to this day. Meanwhile, Vladimir Megre, having made a fortune from this movement, continues to live in a luxurious house and publish his books.